paradox. That's the word that haunts every relationship with someone who has an avoidant attachment style. The more you chase, the further they retreat. The more you show love, the more they seem to withdraw. And yet, there exists one particular move, one psychological maneuver, that can completely reverse this dynamic and make an avoidant partner suddenly fight for the relationship they've been running from. This is the one move that makes an avoidant fight for the relationship, and it involves understanding two powerful psychological principles: the scarcity effect and the illusion of control. You see, my dear viewer, after decades of observing human nature both on screen and off, I've come to understand that love, like the finest wine, requires the right conditions to truly flourish. Too much attention, too much availability, too much pursuit, and paradoxically, you create the very distance you're trying to close. But create the right kind of space, the right kind of uncertainty, and suddenly that avoidant partner who seemed emotionally unreachable begins to experience something they rarely feel: the fear of loss. The human psyche is a curious thing. We are wired, from our earliest evolutionary days, to pursue what retreats and to retreat from what pursues too eagerly. This isn't cruelty, it's psychology. And when it comes to avoidant attachment styles, this principle becomes even more pronounced. These individuals have learned, often through childhood experiences, that emotional safety lies in independence, that vulnerability leads to pain, and that the safest relationship is one they can control or exit at will. But what happens when that control is threatened? What happens when the person they've grown accustomed to having in their back pocket, always available, always understanding, always waiting, suddenly becomes unavailable? This is where the magic happens, where the scarcity effect kicks in like a perfectly timed crescendo in a symphony. Suddenly, what was taken for granted becomes precious. What was always there becomes desperately desired. The illusion of control plays an equally fascinating role in this dynamic. Avoidant individuals often stay in relationships precisely because they feel they can manage the terms. They can dictate the level of intimacy, the frequency of contact, the emotional temperature of the connection. They're like directors of their own romantic film, keeping everyone else in supporting roles while they maintain the lead. But remove that illusion, show them that they're not actually directing this particular scene, and watch how quickly their entire approach changes. Now, before we delve deeper into this psychological territory, let me be crystal clear about what we're discussing. This isn't about manipulation or playing games for the sake of causing pain. This is about understanding human psychology so deeply that you can create the conditions for genuine connection to flourish. It's about stepping back from patterns that aren't serving anyone, not you, not them, not the relationship itself. Think of it like this. Imagine you're holding a butterfly in your cupped hands. Hold too tightly and you'll crush its delicate wings. Hold too loosely and it may fly away. But create just the right environment. Open your hands, allow freedom while providing a reason to stay. And that butterfly might just choose to remain, not because it's trapped, but because it wants to be there. This move we're about to explore works because it addresses the fundamental fears and desires that drive avoidant behavior. It doesn't try to force intimacy or demand emotional availability. Instead, it creates a psychological shift that makes the avoidant person suddenly see the relationship, and you, through completely different eyes. They stop taking your presence for granted and start recognizing your value. They stop feeling trapped by your love and start feeling motivated to earn it. But this requires courage, my friend. It requires you to step away from the instinctual response to pursue harder when someone withdraws. It requires you to trust in psychological principles that may feel counterintuitive, but are as reliable as gravity itself. Most importantly, it requires you to value yourself enough to stop accepting breadcrumbs and start expecting the full feast of genuine partnership. The story I'm about to share with you illustrates these principles in action, showing how one person's decision to radically shift their approach transformed not just their relationship, but their entire understanding of love itself. Let me tell you about Marcus and Catherine, two souls who found themselves locked in the eternal dance of pursuit and retreat that defines so many relationships with avoidant partners. Marcus was brilliant, successful, charming when he wanted to be, and utterly terrified of genuine intimacy. He had perfected the art of being present while remaining emotionally absent, of being loving while maintaining his escape routes. Catherine, on the other hand, was everything Marcus claimed to want in a partner. She was understanding, patient, supportive, perhaps too understanding, too patient, too supportive. For 3 years, she had adapted herself to Marcus's emotional rhythms. When he withdrew, she gave him space. When he returned, she welcomed him with open arms. When he avoided difficult conversations, she convinced herself it was because he needed time. She had become, without realizing it, the perfect enabler for his avoidant patterns. Their relationship existed in a perpetual state of almost committed, almost living together, almost engaged. Marcus would move forward just enough to keep Catherine hopeful, then retreat just enough to maintain his sense of freedom. It was like watching someone approach a beautiful painting in a museum, close enough to admire it, never close enough to truly see its intricate details. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday evening in March. Catherine had prepared Marcus's favorite dinner, expecting their usual comfortable evening together. But Marcus arrived distracted, distant, checking his phone repeatedly. When she asked about their upcoming vacation, a trip they had discussed for months, Marcus suddenly became vague, mentioning work pressures and uncertain schedules. But instead of her usual understanding nod, instead of offering to postpone or adjust plans to accommodate his needs, Catherine simply said, "I understand. I think I'll book something for myself then. I've been wanting to visit my sister in Barcelona anyway." And she meant it. Something had shifted inside her, some recognition that she had been living on emotional scraps while convincing herself she was at a feast. The change in Marcus was immediate, though subtle. His phone suddenly seemed less interesting. His attention snapped back to her with laser focus. "Wait, what do you mean? We've been planning this together." But Catherine had already mentally moved on. She began talking about Barcelona, about how excited her sister would be, about the art galleries she wanted to visit alone. Over the following weeks, Catherine continued this shift. She didn't announce it dramatically or make ultimatums. She simply began living her life as if Marcus's inconsistency was no longer her primary concern. When he cancelled plans last minute, she made other plans. When he was emotionally unavailable, she became emotionally invested elsewhere, in her friends, her hobbies, her own dreams. The scarcity effect began its quiet work. Marcus, who had always known Catherine would be there when he decided to return his attention to the relationship, suddenly wasn't sure. His illusion of control, the assumption that he could regulate the relationship's temperature at will, began to crumble. Catherine wasn't playing hard to get. She was simply getting hard to reach because she was busy living a full life that didn't revolve around his availability. The shift in Marcus was profound. He began initiating conversations about their future together. He started making concrete plans instead of vague suggestions. Most remarkably, he began sharing his fears and insecurities, the very vulnerabilities he had spent years protecting. When Catherine mentioned a colleague who had invited her to a work conference in Prague, Marcus actually said, "I don't like the idea of you traveling with him." It was the first time he had ever expressed anything resembling jealousy or possessiveness. But here's what made Catherine's approach so effective. She wasn't punishing Marcus or trying to make him jealous. She was genuinely reclaiming her own life. When he expressed concern about Prague, she listened with empathy but didn't immediately reassure him or change her plans to soothe his discomfort. Instead, she said, "I understand that makes you uncomfortable. What do you think we should do about that?" For the first time in their relationship, Marcus found himself fighting for something he had taken for granted. He found himself considering what he might lose rather than what he might be trapped by. The woman who had always been his safety net was no longer guaranteed, and suddenly he understood her value in ways he never had before. 6 months later, Marcus proposed. Not with the reluctant energy of someone being pushed toward commitment, but with the urgent energy of someone who had realized what he almost lost. He later told Catherine that watching her create a full, rich life that didn't center around his emotional availability had been both terrifying and incredibly attractive. "I realized," he said, "that I didn't want to be just an option in your life, and I didn't want you to be just an option in mine." Their story illustrates perfectly how the scarcity effect and the disruption of the illusion of control can transform an avoidant person's entire approach to relationship. Catherine didn't chase Marcus away or manipulate him into commitment. She simply stopped organizing her life around his inconsistency and started building something beautiful on her own terms. Now let's examine the practical application of these psychological principles. Because understanding the theory is only half the battle. The real transformation happens when you begin implementing these concepts with wisdom, integrity, and genuine self-respect. The first critical step is what I call emotional recalibration. This means fundamentally shifting your relationship with uncertainty. Most people in relationships with avoidant partners become addicted to the cycle of pursuit and retreat, because it creates an artificial sense of intensity. The anxiety of not knowing where you stand gets confused with passion, and the relief when they return feels like love. But true emotional recalibration means finding your stability within yourself, not in their behavior toward you. This recalibration requires you to develop what I call outcome independence. You must genuinely reach a place where you're more interested in living authentically than in controlling their response to your authenticity. This isn't about pretending not to care. It's about caring more about your own integrity than their approval. When you can honestly say, "I would prefer this relationship to work out, but I'll be fine if it doesn't," you've achieved the psychological state that makes avoidant individuals suddenly pay attention. The second step involves strategic withdrawal of emotional labor. For too long, you've likely been doing the emotional heavy lifting in the relationship, initiating difficult conversations, managing plans, providing reassurance, accommodating their need for space while neglecting your own needs for consistency. Strategic withdrawal means you stop being the relationship's emotional manager and start being an equal participant. This doesn't mean becoming cold or punitive. Instead, it means matching their energy investment. If they text you once a day, you text once a day. If they make plans 2 days in advance, you make plans 2 days in advance. If they share surface-level information about their day, you share surface-level information about yours. This creates what psychologists call reciprocal intimacy. The level of emotional investment becomes mutual rather than one-sided. The third crucial element is developing what I call attractive unavailability. This is perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of this approach. You're not trying to become unavailable to hurt them or to play games. You're becoming unavailable because you're building a life so rich and fulfilling that you don't have unlimited time to accommodate someone else's inconsistency. This means saying yes to opportunities that interest you, even if they interfere with your usual availability. It means making plans with friends and keeping them, even if your avoidant partner suddenly decides they want to spend time with you. It means pursuing goals and dreams that matter to you, whether or not they fit into your partner's vision of the relationship. The psychological impact of this approach on an avoidant person cannot be overstated. Remember, their entire attachment strategy is built on the belief that they can control the emotional distance in the relationship. When you stop being predictably available, when you stop organizing your schedule around their preferences, when you stop providing constant reassurance about the relationship's future, you fundamentally disrupt their sense of control. But here's the crucial distinction. You're not trying to control their response to your unavailability. You're genuinely building a life that doesn't require their participation to be fulfilling. This authenticity is what creates the real scarcity effect. They're not competing with games or manipulation. They're competing with your actual life, your real interests, your genuine happiness. The fourth step requires mastering what I call comfortable mystery. Avoidant individuals often withdraw because they feel too known, too predictable in the relationship dynamic. They crave the excitement of uncertainty, but usually create it by being uncertain themselves. Instead, you become the source of positive uncertainty. You develop new interests they don't know about. You have experiences they're not part of. You grow and change in ways that make you genuinely more interesting. This doesn't mean being secretive or deceptive. It means being selectively sharing. When they ask about your day, you might mention the interesting parts while leaving out the details about how those experiences made you feel about them or the relationship. You remain warm and loving, but you're no longer an open book that they can read at their convenience. The fifth and perhaps most challenging aspect is learning to respond rather than react to their attempts to regain control. When an avoidant person begins to feel the scarcity effect, their first instinct is often to intensify their push-pull behavior. They might become more affectionate temporarily, then withdraw more dramatically. They might make grand gestures followed by periods of distance. They're essentially testing whether you've really changed or if you'll return to the old patterns of chasing and accommodating. Your response to these tests determines everything. If you immediately return to your previous patterns at the first sign of their renewed interest, you teach them that your changes weren't permanent. But if you maintain your new approach, remaining warm but not overly available, pleased but not overly grateful for their attention, you demonstrate that your transformation is genuine. This phase requires tremendous emotional discipline. Every instinct will tell you to reward their renewed interest by becoming fully available again, but doing so immediately returns you to the old dynamic. Instead, you must allow them to experience the natural consequences of their previous behavior while showing them what consistent, mutual investment looks like. The final crucial element is what I call dignified patience. This entire approach takes time to work, often months rather than weeks. The avoidant person needs time to process their changing feelings, to work through their fears about increased intimacy, to develop new patterns of relating. Your job is to remain consistent in your new approach while allowing them the space to evolve. This patience must be dignified, meaning it has boundaries. You're not waiting indefinitely for someone to decide you're worth consistent treatment. You're living your life authentically while remaining open to the possibility of deeper connection if they choose to match your emotional investment. Throughout this process, remember that you're not trying to fix them or force them to change. You're creating conditions that make their natural movement toward intimacy feel safe and desirable rather than threatening and suffocating. You're showing them what it feels like to be with someone who has their own life, their own interests, their own emotional stability. As we draw toward the close of our exploration, I want you to understand that what we've discussed today isn't merely a strategy. It's a fundamental shift in how you approach love itself. The one move that makes an avoidant fight for the relationship isn't really a move at all. It's a way of being. It's choosing to love yourself as much as you love them. It's deciding that you deserve consistency, effort, and genuine partnership rather than accepting the crumbs of someone's divided attention. The scarcity effect works because it reflects reality. You truly are scarce. You are unique, valuable, irreplaceable. But if you don't believe this yourself, if you don't live as if this is true, how can you expect anyone else to recognize it? When you begin organizing your life around your own worth, rather than their validation, something magical happens. Not only do they begin to see your value more clearly, but you do too. The illusion of control that avoidant individuals cling to isn't really about controlling you. It's about controlling their own vulnerability. When you stop being controllable, when you stop being predictable in your availability and accommodation, you force them to confront their own feelings more honestly. They can no longer take you for granted, which means they can no longer take their own feelings for granted either. But here's what I need you to understand with absolute clarity. This approach only works if you're genuinely prepared for either outcome. You must be truly ready for the possibility that your avoidant partner will choose to maintain their distance rather than step into deeper intimacy. This isn't a failure of the approach. It's valuable information. It tells you that this person isn't ready or willing to meet you at the level of partnership you deserve. The courage required for this approach cannot be understated. It means releasing your grip on an outcome you desperately want. It means trusting that if this relationship is meant to flourish, it will do so under conditions of mutual respect and effort. It means believing that you deserve to be chosen actively, consistently, enthusiastically, not just accepted passively or intermittently. Take action starting today. Begin building a life so rich, so fulfilling, so authentically yours that anyone would be honored to be included in it. Stop managing their emotions and start honoring your own. Stop accepting inconsistency as the price of love and start expecting the full expression of genuine partnership. Remember, my dear friend, that love without respect is merely attachment, and attachment without freedom is merely possession. What you're creating through this approach is the possibility of real love, the kind that chooses to stay not because it has to, but because it wants to, the kind that grows stronger with freedom rather than weaker, the kind that fights for itself because it recognizes its own value. The choice, as always, is yours. You can continue the familiar dance of pursuit and retreat, hoping that somehow your increased effort will inspire their increased investment. Or you can step into the more challenging but ultimately more rewarding path of authentic self-respect, trusting that real love will recognize and respond to real worth. Your happiness doesn't depend on their choice, but their ability to choose you in a meaningful way absolutely depends on your willingness to choose yourself first.
If you believe this video might help someone dear to you, share it with them. A small gesture on your part could mean the world to a friend in need.